This message is a presentation of Pinnacle Baptist Church and the preaching ministry of Pastor Ray McBarry. Other messages like this are available online at pinnaclebaptist.com. The church is located at 2517 High Falls Road in Griffin, Georgia. If you're in the area, we would love for you to visit us this Sunday. Now, here's today's message.
We're on. All right, here we go. Well, I thought that we would start tonight with our geography review. And so this is the map you've seen multiple times from the preacher. And again, like last week, we will not be laughing at the preacher's drawing skills. But let's try to identify some of these things up here that are on the map. First of all, this river that we see with the delta at the end of the river, what's this river here? The Nile River, that's right. All right. And the Nile flows into what big body of water here on the map? TR? All right, there's the Mediterranean Sea. What's this island up here to the north of Egypt in the Mediterranean? What'd you say? I'm sorry, you were right. Cyprus is correct. Cyprus. Good job. You took notes last time, didn't you?
Yes, it's very we're not cannot read.
Well, you got that one right. So what's this body of land, this big peninsula that juts out into the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea to the north of the island of Cyprus? What's that? Asia Minor is correct. In the Bible, it's usually just called Asia, but it's Asia Minor. The rest of Asia would be the Asia proper. This peninsula is Asia Minor. It's a small offshoot of the continent of Asia. It is what we today call the country of Turkey. All right? Then this area here, of course, is the area where Israel was located during their time in the Promised Land. It's also the modern-day state of Israel. One of you young men back there, tell me what's this body of water to the northeast of Israel? No, but that's a good guess. TR, let's let somebody else give this one a try. Yes, sir? That's right. It's the Sea of Galilee. All right. By the way, that was in our sermon this morning. That's the body of water that the disciples were going across when the storm came up. The Sea of Galilee. All right, then we have this body of water down here. That's the Dead Sea. It's also known as the Salt Sea or the Great Salt Sea because it's so salty there that you can literally float in the water even if you're not good at swimming or floating. There's so much salt in the water, it buoys you up and holds you on top of the surface there. It's called the Dead Sea because it's so salty that nothing around it will grow because the salt has it's so acidic in the soil there, no plants can grow. And then there's this river that connects the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. That would be what river?
Jordan River.
The Jordan River. Not having school right now, but still getting some geography in. That's good. And then what's this city represented by the star near the Dead Sea? Jerusalem is correct. That's, of course, the capital of Israel. I'm going to abbreviate it. Jerusalem. Then over to the east of the land of Israel is the modern-day country of Iraq, where we've had so much in the news for the last 20 years or more. And here is the Persian Gulf. We haven't talked really a lot about that, but there's the Persian Gulf. That's this body of water. Then there are two rivers that come up out of... All right, so what are these rivers? Good. That's great. The Tigris and Euphrates. And this one that comes up the longest on the outside of the curve, that's the Tigris. Daniel, does anybody remember the other name Daniel called the Tigris River earlier in the book? He also referred to it as the river Hiddekel. Hiddekel. Okay, and here's the Euphrates. The mighty Euphrates. The city of Babylon was actually built right on the river, somewhere along here. The Persian Empire, Persia, was farther to the east. And we started talking 2 Bible studies ago about the beginning of chapter 11 and all of the prophecies that are given related to the history of 2 different empires. These are 2 of the empires that sprang up after the death of Alexander the Great. Abigail, you want to give us one of them?
The Seleucid Empire.
And where is the Seleucid Empire located?
I don't remember.
Is it up here? Is it up here?
Yeah.
That's right. It's this area that takes in much of the upper part of the land between the 2 rivers. Anybody remember what that word from geography is for the land between the 2 rivers? TR? Mesopotamia, that's right. It means land between the rivers, a very fertile land. And the Seleucid Empire actually continued even further to the east than what our map shows here. We've just run out of room on the whiteboard. Then there was, okay, so let's put the Seleucid Empire here. It was where modern-day Syria is located, to the north of Israel. Then down here was the other kingdom, and it included, for most of the history in Daniel 11, also part of the Promised Land, Israel. What's this country down here? Egypt is right. All right, now, the Syria was controlled by the Seleucid family, which was one of Alexander the Great's generals when he died. Egypt was controlled by another one of his generals. TR? Ptolemy. So the Ptolemy family ruled Egypt. Now keep in mind, the Ptolemies were Greeks, just like Alexander the Great was. But once he dies, they're ruling Egypt. So it's still Greeks ruling Egypt, not Egyptians. And up in Syria, where the Seleucid Empire was located, they're ruled by Greeks also, because the original Seleucid general who started this empire, he was one of Alexander the Great's Greek generals also. So they're all being ruled by Greeks, but in different geographical areas. All right, so there's our geography review. And you all did very well, by the way. Your teachers at school would be delighted in you, I have no doubt. In Daniel chapter 11, we have so far seen the first 2/3 of the book, of the chapter. The first third of the chapter, we dealt with the history of about 150 years worth of dueling or battling between the kingdom of the north, the Seleucids, and the kingdom of the south, the Ptolemies in Egypt. And we've read about the back and forth that is given out in very exact, precise detail about different kings from the north, different kings from the south, and all of their interactions with each other, spanning about 150 years worth of history between the 2 empires. Then last week we saw the middle part of this chapter, from verses 21 down to verse 35. All of those verses deal with prophecies related to one man, one particular king. Who is the king that we see prophesied about from verses 21 to 35 in the chapter? Who is this man? We also saw him in a couple of other chapters in the book of Daniel referred to. That'd be Antiochus, that's right. Specifically, his name is Antiochus, what? Epiphanes, that's right. He gave the name to himself. Sometimes it's translated as Antiochus the Illustrious. It actually means Antiochus the embodiment of God, the revelation of God. That's the view that he had of himself. TR?
Epiphany coming from the word epiphany, basically meaning a thought coming to someone. It's more just revelation of God, isn't it?
It means revealed or delivered by God. Yeah. So, from verses 21 to 35, we saw very detailed prophecies about what this man, Antiochus Epiphanes, would do when he came to the throne. And Antiochus Epiphanes was, of course, from the Seleucid Empire. And so he is, in verses 21 through 35, he's referred to over and over again as the king of the north. Because all of the kings from the Seleucid Empire in this chapter, they're all the kings of the north. He is the specific king of the north that's referred to from 21 to 35 in the chapter. And it tells us about many of the different things that he did and attempted to do. We saw that he was a very crafty, treacherous, lying sort of fellow. He didn't mind lying to anyone if it would help him get what he wanted. He had deceived and tricked the young king of the Ptolemies, who was in a battle against his brother to actually be recognized as the official king of Egypt. And Antiochus Epiphanes used this conflict between the two brothers of the Ptolemies to move in and take over much of the riches of Egypt under the pretext of telling the one brother, I'm just here to help you. I'm here to make sure your brother doesn't try to take the throne away from you. But of course, the whole time he's down here supposedly to help out, he's taking all the wealth out of some of the major cities in Egypt, and he's going to take it home with him when he goes. As he's going back home, though, to Syria, he has to go through the Promised Land, the land of Israel, the land that Daniel has previously called the glorious land. As he goes through there, he remembers that he doesn't really like the Jews anyway. Both he and his family before him have had problems with the high priest in Jerusalem not wanting to turn over all the gold and silver and the tithes, the temple tax that was paid, so that he could take it back and use it to pay the Romans off on that treaty and the tribute that his father had gotten into with Rome and had to come up with lots and lots of silver every year. We talked about that being about $2 billion worth of silver they had to come up with every year in tribute back to Rome. So he and his brother before him had tried to get money out of the high priest of Israel. Didn't go over real well. He doesn't care for the Jews anyway. And so there in Jerusalem, he had the high priest of Israel murdered, assassinated, Onias III. And in addition to that, when the Jews tried to rise up in rebellion against him, he had 80,000 Jews killed at one time. He had about another 100,000 put in bonds and taken back to Syria as slaves. So an awful, awful man. But probably the worst thing that he did is he desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. Now somebody remind us how he desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. Timothy?
He sacrificed a pig and then he made a broth out of the pig and he poured it around the temple.
That's exactly right. Of course, for the Jews, the most unclean animal there is the pig. He had them sacrifice a sow on the altar that was used for burnt offerings to Jehovah. And as Timothy said, he had them also make a broth out of it and pour it all around in the temple so that they defiled the entire temple as well as the altar. He then had them create another altar that was placed or sat on top of the altar of burnt offering where the sow was sacrificed. And they used that routinely for sacrifices to his Greek gods and goddesses. And then, of course, the ultimate came where he had a statue of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, brought in there and had the statue of Zeus put in the temple of the true and living God in Jerusalem. Desecrated the temple. In Daniel, it's referred to as the abomination of desolation. Why? Because this abomination made the temple where it could not be used in the worship of Jehovah until it was purified. The abomination of desolation. We know that the person in verses 21 through 35 literally did that. He's a historical figure. We know even the secular historians tell us about these awful deeds he committed against the people of Israel and against the God of Israel. But we also know that there's coming a later time in history when that abomination of desolation or something very similar to it is going to occur. That's a very similar thing to what Antiochus did, but it's not what Antiochus did. You say, preacher, what are you talking about? Well, Daniel is talking about something that was actually committed by Antiochus Epiphanes. But in Jesus' earthly ministry, which is still more than 200 years after Antiochus Epiphanes, Jesus said, do you remember what was spoken of by the prophet Daniel about the abomination of desolation? Jesus said, it hasn't happened yet. You say, wait a minute, I thought Antiochus Epiphanes literally offered the sow. He did. But what Jesus is telling us in Matthew 24:15 is that there's someone who's coming in the end times who's going to do the same thing Antiochus Epiphanes did and defile the temple in Jerusalem. Now, who could Jesus have been talking about that's coming in the end times who's going to defile the temple in Jerusalem like Antiochus Epiphanes did back in the Old Testament? The Antichrist, that's right. The Antichrist who is coming in the future during the tribulation period, after the church has already been raptured out of here. That period of 7 years, that awful, awful period. Daniel said it was the time of trouble such as never was. That period of tribulation is when the abomination of desolation will take place. Listen to Jesus in Matthew 24:15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So Jesus plainly taught that even though Antiochus Epiphanes committed the abomination of desolation in the Old Testament, there's someone still coming in the future who's going to commit the abomination of desolation. Antiochus Epiphanes what is called a shadow or a type or a forerunner of the real person who's going to commit the real abomination of desolation. That will be the person of the Antichrist. Back to Daniel chapter 11. So we've covered up through verse 35. From verse 36 to the end of the chapter, the last third of the chapter seems, at first glance, like it's still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It's still referring to him as he. He, just as it's been referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, all the way from verses 21 to 35. But we know verses 36 through 45 are not dealing with Antiochus Epiphanes, but with a future king. You say, preacher, how do we know that? Well, in a few moments, when we come to the place where it's obvious, we'll point it out. You'll remember in Daniel chapter 9, in the study of Daniel's 70 weeks, that there was a study, that in our study we saw that the first 69 weeks were chronologically back to back to back to back. 69 weeks leading up to the Messiah. But the events that we saw for Daniel's 70th week, that period of 7 years that was still left, the things recorded that are to happen in the 70th week are still unfulfilled. They've never happened yet. So we know Daniel's 70th week is a 7-year period that's still in the future. That, of course, is the period of the tribulation that's still in the future in our day and time. The man we see spoken of in Daniel chapter 11, beginning in verse 36, is not Antiochus Epiphanes. He is that Antichrist from the end times, from Daniel's 70th week. So let's see what Daniel's prophecy has to say about the Antichrist. And as we go through, we'll see if you can spot it for yourselves. How do we know this is not still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes? If you see it, you let me know. Here we go, verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined, for that is determined shall be done. First thing it says here about this person, this king that is still yet to come in the future, that we know as the Antichrist, it says he's going to exalt himself above every god. You and I know from having read the book of Revelation, that's exactly what the Antichrist will do. He's referred to as the beast. And the Bible tells us that the beast will be worshipped in the tribulation period. The people of the earth will view him as their Messiah, and they will worship him. And an image of the beast will be set up, according to the book of Revelation, in the temple in Jerusalem. The Antichrist will be worshipped. TR?
Bigger sense of this is the Antichrist reading.
Sure.
At the very end of the verse, the last half of it, it says, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Prosper till the indignation. It's talking about something that seems for one bigger event than just Antiochus Epiphanes. Also, it says, for that is determined shall be done. It's talking about what is prophesied. And Antiochus Epiphanes may have been prophesied, but this feels like it would be talking about something of greater importance.
So that's possible. There are, of course, those who would argue that, well, it's talking about the indignation that Antiochus Epiphanes poured out on the people of God. But you're right. We know from putting this together with Jesus' words in Matthew 24 and 25 and the book of Revelation that we're looking at something in the 70th week that has not yet come. And the indignation that's spoken of is, of course, that awful time of trouble, the tribulation itself. And at the end that is appointed, is the very destruction of the Antichrist that will end his reign. That will be the battle of Armageddon that occurs at the second coming. Look at verse 37. Still speaking of the Antichrist, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Now, the God of his fathers is a term that's used repeatedly in the Old Testament to refer to the God of Israel. Many Bible scholars, your pastor included, believes this is an indication that the Antichrist may be a Jew, by birth anyway. Now, I know we've already seen in 2 other chapters of the book of Daniel that the Antichrist is going to come from the revived Roman Empire. And specifically, it appears from the Seleucid portion of the old Roman Empire that was so large. But when it says he will not regard the God of his fathers, it seems to be an indication he's a Jew from the revived Roman Empire. Now, there are some Bible scholars who simply believe that this is saying that whoever the gods of his fathers were, he's rejected them. He's thrown them aside. But I think this is a good indication that he will be a Jew. And one of the reasons that your pastor believes that is that the Antichrist is called the Antichrist for a reason. He's supposed to be a counterfeit by Satan for the real Christ. Well, how could he be an accurate counterfeit for the Messiah if he's not even a Jew? So I believe he will deceive the Jews and the Gentiles of the world because he will be a Jew. So when it says he will not regard the God of his fathers, I think he's probably a Jew from this part of the old Roman Empire, or at least from some part of the revived Roman Empire. Look at the very next phrase. It's just as curious, and it too is debated among Bible scholars. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. Some Bible scholars say that he's just an abuser of women. When it says he doesn't regard the desire of women, I think, to me, that indicates he probably isn't attracted to women. And, of course, we see in the modern world, especially in recent years, in this generation, homosexuality has just exploded, not only in America, but across the world. It is the ultimate form of rebellion against God. And that seems like it may be a description of the Antichrist. Nor regard any God. This fella, he's not going to have a regard for any God. Why? Because he wants to be worshipped himself. For he shall magnify himself above all. Isn't that what the book of Revelation tells us the Antichrist will do? He will be worshipped. Verse 38. But in his estate, that is his place of control, shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. It says he doesn't worship any other God, but he honors the God of forces. I think, from what we're about to see in the very next verse, we see that this is an individual that the only thing he respects more than himself is force. Brute force. Power. We were talking before church tonight about the new Star Wars movie and the whole string of Star Wars movies. May the force be with you. If there's any force that the Antichrist regards more than himself, it's the God of force. Power. Being able to make other people do what you want them to do. Look at the next verse. It just describes it. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. Now, the first part of this verse is very interesting because we were just told he doesn't honor any God, and yet in verse 39 it says, "Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory." Who is it that the Antichrist or the beast in the book of Revelation glorifies during the tribulation period? Satan, that's exactly right. The dragon, as he's called in the book of Revelation. Just as Jesus points us to the Father, so too does the Antichrist, the false Messiah, the false Christ, point people to the worship of the dragon, Satan himself, who is the counterfeit of God the Father. So while he doesn't regard any other God, there is a strange God he's going to get glory for. And it's Satan himself, the dragon, as he's called in Revelation. The last part of the verse says, "And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain." Apparently, he's going to appoint individuals to rule in his stead, in his place, for him on his behalf. It's very likely these will be individuals, but as we saw in Daniel chapter 10, there is a spiritual warfare going on where different devils are assigned geographical territory that they are to oversee. There's a devil over these United States who oversees the destruction of America right now, I believe, spiritually, that you and I can't see. I think there are devils that are over every country around the world. And if we were honest, there's probably a devil right here in Griffin, Georgia, and this is his responsibility. And can I say, if that's the case, the one that's assigned to Griffin has been doing a great job for a lot of years. But it could be that this verse is talking about devils that are assigned, as well as individual humans, to rule on his behalf over the territory of his kingdom and his empire. Verse number 40. Listen to what it says. "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." Verse 40 is the verse that I think better than any other verse from 36 to 45 demonstrates that this last part of the chapter is not talking any longer about Antiochus Epiphanes. Why? Because Antiochus Epiphanes in verses 21 to 35 was referred to as the king of the north, just like all of his fathers before him were referred to as the king of the north. And it looks like when we get to verse 36, we just keep learning and reading about the king of the north. But this can't be the king of the north, because look what it said in verse 40. It said, "The king of the south shall come against him, but the king of the north shall also come against him." This could not be the same person as Antiochus Epiphanes, because the king of the north can't come against him because he is the king of the north, Antiochus Epiphanes. So whoever this world leader is going to be attacked by an army from the south and by an army from the north. He's going to be caught in a pincher movement, and it appears that the battle will be fought somewhere here in the land of Israel. I can remember as a boy growing up and hearing about the Antichrist and the one world government, and I assumed for myself that the Antichrist, TR, literally ruled the whole earth, that his government controlled the whole earth. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that the empire of the Antichrist appears to be that made up the old Roman Empire. Most of Europe, the islands, maybe even down here into what is now part of the Middle East. But here we see that whoever this king is being attacked by the king of the north and the king of the south. The Antichrist doesn't control the whole world. During the tribulation, Satan controls all the nations of the world, but the Antichrist only controls that one kingdom. You say, why in the world would Satan bring armies from the north and from the south to fight with the Antichrist and his army here in Israel, in the middle? Any ideas? TR?
Because they are God's chosen people. And he knows that they are the ones that God chose in the Bible to take up his word and his gospel and spread it to the world. And so he sees that as not only the birthplace of his mortal enemy and most hated enemy, but also it is where the gospel originated from.
But the question, though, TR, is why would he bring another empire to fight with the Antichrist? That's his man. And why would he bring another army up from the south to fight with the Antichrist? Why is he bringing three different armies converging in the land of Israel to fight, a big battle in Israel? To prove his power? Satan? That's a very good possibility.
Well, I mean, if he's the Antichrist, he's supposed to do all these things that Jesus did, perform the miracles and stuff like that. And how can he prove it if nobody's coming against him?
That's a good point. So Satan may be bringing these other world empires together to fight with one another here. I think probably what TR and Kim have both said go into what the reason is. Let me add to that a little bit if I could. If you're living in the place where the war is happening, isn't there a good chance that your home, your land, your people, being caught up in the middle of all of it, you're going to suffer as well? I think that's one of the reasons that Satan allows these different world empires to converge in Israel to fight it out, because it's going to lead to collateral damage, if you would. That is, the people of God, the children of Israel, will be caught up in the middle of all that. Abigail?
That's exactly what I'm about to say, because he wants to destroy the Israelites, because that's the promised land.
That's right.
Of God, and he wants that destroyed.
I think Abigail's hit the nail on the head. He has been trying for thousands of years to destroy God's chosen people, the Israelites. And so what better way to do it than by bringing all these major empires together and having them fight it out in Israel's backyard? Israel are the ones that are going to suffer as much as the three armies are. So the battle will be fought. The Antichrist is going to appear victorious, even fighting against an enemy from the south and an enemy from the north. By the way, Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 talks about what I think are probably two different battles that will be fought during the tribulation period. One of those battles, I believe, is fought somewhere around the middle of the tribulation. The other battle will be fought at the end of the millennium, which is still after the tribulation period. The battles of Gog and Magog. Some Bible scholars believe Ezekiel 38 and 39 are talking about one battle, but I believe if you read them carefully, it's talking about two battles in the same place, fought by more or less the same countries. So if that is correct, the army of the north that comes down may very well include Russia and her allies. The army from the south that comes up will very likely include Egypt and her allies, the Muslim countries allied with Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, and perhaps some of the other Muslim countries as well. Look at verse number 41. He shall enter also into the glorious land. What land is the glorious land? The promised land. Israel, that's right. And many countries shall be overthrown. That is, the Antichrist is going to have great military success. He's going to take over lots of countries. But these shall escape out of his hand. Even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. So the Bible says that there are 3 countries that are going to escape the Antichrist. He's not going to conquer them. By the way, we saw the land of Edom this morning in our Sunday school class. Remember the Herod family? Abigail, go ahead. Well, yes, where was the kingdom of the Edomites located? North, south, east, or west? Let's start at Jerusalem. Which direction do I go?
Down. Whatever.
South?
No. Slanted, like south something. South.
Here?
Yeah.
You're right. To the southeast of Israel was the kingdom of Edom. The Ammonites and the Moabites are down here too. Does anyone know what modern day country is to the southeast of Israel? There's not a country today called Edom, but all of that land belongs to what modern day country? No, sir. That's closer to India, Uncle Milton. It's the country of Jordan. It's actually referred to even today as the kingdom of Jordan. It says that the Antichrist will not conquer this area of the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. It's the modern day country of Jordan. What's also interesting, if you'll remember a little while ago when we read Jesus' words about the coming abomination of desolation, he told the remnant of Jews that escaped the Antichrist at the time of the abomination of desolation, he said, flee to the mountains. That city that we talked about in our Sunday school class this morning, it's an ancient city that is in the mountains, in Jordan, in the old land of Edom, the city of Petra. Some Bible scholars believe that the remnant of Israel may end up fleeing in the tribulation, fleeing from the Antichrist to the old city of Petra and the area of the Edomites, because it's so easy to defend. The narrow valley, the canyon that opens up into the city of Petra, on either end, the canyon is so narrow that no more than 10 men can stand side by side at the entrance to either end of the canyon. It would be an easy place to defend. It seems from what Jesus said in Matthew 24:15 and 16, and in this passage, perhaps the remnant of Jews are going to flee to the land of Edom to escape the Antichrist. Verse 42. He, that is the Antichrist, shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So here we have word that the Antichrist is going to be successful. Apparently the Antichrist is going to win this big battle that takes place in the promised land, the glorious land. He's going to defeat this army from the south. He's going to defeat that army coming down from the north, which may very well include Russia. He's going to conquer all of Egypt, it just said. and take all of their gold and silver. Then it says he's going to conquer Libya. Libya is over here to the west of Egypt. And he's going to conquer Ethiopia, which is down here to the south of Egypt, further down in Africa. The only place he won't be able to conquer is this little area right here. Doesn't it seem amazing that the armies of the Antichrist could conquer everybody else, but they couldn't take this one little area down here in the mountains? Why you reckon that is, Abigail? It's because God has prepared that place for Israel, or whatever is left of Israel, to flee to, lest they be completely annihilated. That's the only explanation for why he could conquer all these other major countries, but he couldn't take that one little area. God is supernaturally preserving a place of safety for Israel to flee at that time.
City of refuge, like he did for all the
That's right.
tribe of Israel had a city of refuge.
You're right. That's a good analogy, the cities of refuge from the Old Testament. He saved a safe place for Israel. All right, we're almost finished with the chapter. Look at verse 44. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. You know, the Bible tells us in the book of Revelation about a giant army coming from the east in the tribulation period. The book of Revelation refers to this group of nations as the kings of the east. It says that the Lord will cause the Euphrates River to dry up so that they can cross the river and do battle with the Antichrist. It also says he hears rumors out of the east and out of the north. Perhaps that is Russia again coming back to do battle. But it appears there's an army coming from the north, an army coming from the east, and the Antichrist army coming from the west. And they're all converging right here once again in the glorious land. By the way, that army of the kings of the east. Think of the countries that are to the east. China, India, Japan, Korea, and others. It used to be that everyone said, oh, China is the most populous place in the world with 1 billion people. But either this year or next year, as I understand it, India is set to actually pass China in total population. Can you imagine if all those eastern countries got their armies together and came against the Antichrist here? What we see is a huge battle again being set to take place, and who's trapped in the middle? Israel. Whatever remains of the Jews, of the Israelites, are caught in this pincher movement. An army coming from the north, an army from the east, and an army from the west. And they are about to be annihilated, which is what Satan has wanted to do for all of human history. Verse 45. And he, that is the Antichrist, shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. It says the Antichrist is going to set up his tents or his capital between the seas in the glorious land in the mountain. Now, what mountain do we know of that is between either this sea and this sea, or that sea and that sea? Well, we know of one particular mountain. TR?
I feel like he said
Well, I think the Mount of Olives is part of it, TR. The Mount of Olives is part of Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the mountain on which Jerusalem sits. Jerusalem perfectly fits the description of the place where the Antichrist will have his capital, his headquarters. Between the seas, here's the Dead Sea, here's the Mediterranean, and on the mountain in the glorious land. It seems that the Antichrist will choose Jerusalem as his capital, his headquarters. And isn't that only fitting if he's the counterfeit of Jesus? Because Jesus' capital is what city? Jerusalem. So there the Antichrist will make his headquarters, his capital, thinking that he is invincible. But as these three armies close in a pincher movement, perhaps to do battle with each other, but also to destroy what's left of Israel, look what happens at the end of verse 45. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. How does the Antichrist come to his end? Go ahead. That's right. It's what happens when Jesus comes back, the second coming. At the second coming, as TR said, Jesus will set foot literally on the Mount of Olives right outside Jerusalem. And just like that, he will annihilate the enemies of God. And there will be none to help the Antichrist. As Abigail said, he'll be cast into the lake of fire. You know, from what the Bible tells us in the rest of the Old Testament and in the book of Revelation, it seems very likely that the scenario that will play out at the moment of the second coming is this. The army coming from this direction, and from this direction, and from that direction will be converging right here where the children of Israel, or what few of them are left, however many that is, they'll be converging right here. And Satan will be looking to annihilate the remnant of Israel. It's at that moment that whatever number is left of Jews are going to finally do what they should have done 2,000 or more years ago and acknowledge that Jesus truly is the Messiah. The one they rejected all those years ago and had him nailed to a cross, they're going to acknowledge, we crucified the Messiah. He really is the Messiah. And they're going to cry out to God for forgiveness and beg the Messiah to return. And that's when he will split the eastern sky. And just before they're annihilated, Jesus returns, destroys the armies of the enemies of God, and that remnant of Israel is saved. Those who have repented and turned to Jesus as the Messiah. It's a lot of exciting prophecy from verses 36 to 45. It's very obvious that these are not prophecies to do with Antiochus Epiphanes, because no honest Bible scholar has ever tried to say that everything in verses 36 through 45 were fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes. Everything from verse 21 to 35 was fulfilled by Antiochus, but not verses 36 through 45. And in verse 40, it's very obvious it's not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, because he's attacked by the king of the north. So we're no longer talking about the king of the north. No, friends, verses 36 through 45 are talking about Daniel's 70th week. That week of 7 years that's also spoken of in Daniel 9, verse 27. It's the tribulation period, the end times. And tonight you got to see a glimpse of the Antichrist, what he's like. and what he does and how he meets his end. Well, friends, that brings us to the end of Daniel chapter 11. Next week is Resurrection Sunday. We are still planning to have Sunday morning services for Resurrection Sunday, but like we normally do, we will not have Sunday evening services so that everyone can spend time with family on Resurrection Sunday. So it'll be the following Sunday evening, Lord willing, we will finish the book of Daniel, for Daniel chapter 12 is a very short chapter. And if you're able to, I hope you'll be here with us to finish the book. TR?